All of us want to be happy. We've looked at different philosophies and philosophers on this show, and generally speaking, they often define the purpose of philosophy as a way to seek a happy life, how to be happy in a difficult, complex world, one of our biggest challenges. Tal Ben-Shahar, in his book Happier, defines happiness as the overall experience of pleasure and meaning. He says a happy person enjoys positive emotions while perceiving her life as purposeful. The definition does not pertain to a single moment, but to a generalized aggregate of one's experiences. A person can endure emotional pain at times and still be happy overall. So happiness is not an experience, a thing, a single event. But of course, happiness is a generalized state of being. We want our lives to be able to be happy no matter what happens, because certainly many of the ways we go about trying to be happy are very vulnerable to whatever else is going on around us. The slightest problem, crisis, tragedy can damage our sense of happiness. Is there a way to be resilient to that, to preserve our happiness, kind of no matter what's really going on? According to Shahar, there are 4 human archetypes of how we go about trying to attain happiness, 4 ways that we approach this in life, which according to him have essentially been kind of inculcated into us through our cultural approach. So, for example, we start off in the rat race archetype. The rat race archetype is we start when we go to school from the age of 6 or 7 years old. And at school, we're told to work hard, get good grades in order to get ahead in life. He says it's really interesting that we don't get told, enjoy school, learning is fun, that kind of thing. No, we rather get told no pain, no gain. So we expect it to be painful. And he says, so that teaches us to always push forward, never really enjoying what we do, but not really understanding why, but pursuing the goal anyway. And he says the rat racer's illusion is that reaching some future destination will bring him lasting happiness. He doesn't recognize the significance of the journey. Then he says there's the hedonist, the hedonism archetype, the person who goes for what gives us pleasure now. No goal, no long-term plan, just doing what feels good in the moment. And the problem with that is that it leads to boredom and meaninglessness. He says the hedonist's illusion is that only the journey is important. So it's kind of the other extreme. Then he says there's the nihilist, and the nihilist focuses on past failures to experience happiness. So it's like the rat race didn't work, hedonism didn't work, so she's given up on those kind of things in what is called learned helplessness. And a lot of us learn helplessness because our culture is very much about the rat race. The nihilist, having given up on both the destination and the journey, is disillusioned with life. The rat race is a slave to the future, the hedonist a slave to the moment, and the nihilist a slave to the past. So when all that is happening isn't working for us, we throw up our hands and say, none of this is working. We give up and enter the nihilist camp. We, he says, want to play in the happiness archetype. The happiness archetype is where we realize that it's not an either or. It's not about making it to the peak of the mountain, and nor is it about endlessly climbing in a journey. Happiness is the experience of climbing towards the peak. That's ultimately his definition. I mean, if you ask yourself enough times why you're doing anything, you'll always come to the bottom line answer is, I'm trying to be happy. I mean, ask yourself the question. Ask yourself, what do you want? What do you really want in your life? Is it, to make a lot of money? Is it to achieve enlightenment? Is it to make a difference in the world? So fine, but then why? Why do you want that? Why do you want a sense of purpose? Why do you want money? Why do you want peace and harmony? For whatever reason you do what you do, ultimately it's because we want to be happy. We want to experience happiness. And interestingly, when we achieve happiness, we become more aware that things like wealth and status and relationships are really just a means to an end. And once we realize that, we can structure our lives better so that we can actually focus on where we are trying to go with it, and that is the achievement of happiness. Shahar suggests that, in essence, the key way of achieving happiness is simple once you understand that it's the structure that allows us to do the journey in a way that is both rewarding in the happiness sense and gets us to the destination, which is another reward. So he says one of the ways to do that is to introduce rituals into our life and into our ways of doing something that we know create happiness for us. And as obvious as it is, it's something we infrequently do because of how we adjust our time. So we generally got a process of, like we need to do X, Y, and Z. All these things that we need to do, have to do, must do for other people, and have deadlines and requirements about, and all of that, those will get done first. And those are not things which per se bring us happiness. It's likely that it's not going to leave very much time to pursue any happiness. We'll talk about the time factor of it in a moment. But it's the rituals that we need to introduce into our lives that mean we can find happiness despite having to do all those things and all the demands from others that prevent us from getting that happiness. So we need to ask ourselves, what could I do? What do I do that brings me happiness? What could I do every day that would introduce a slice of happiness into my day? It could be going to gym. It could be meditating. It could be having a date night once a week, going to a movie or going out for dinner once a week, or spending Saturday afternoon reading a book and making that sacred. So Shahar says, introduce a maximum of 2 rituals, 1 or 2 rituals into your life. Once they become habits, you can then introduce another one, and so on. So you introduce a ritual and wait for it to become habitual over a little while. It usually takes presumably a couple of weeks. And then there's like this one stable thing that's there every day or every week, whatever it may be, that helps you identify what makes you happy, what it feels like to be happy, and helps you start reprioritizing your time. So the first thing to do is, once you know what makes you happy or what could make you happy, those simple things, what could make you happy, he says, do that before you do all the other stuff. Now, not all of that is something that you're going to be able to do first thing in the morning. But he's saying the things that make us happy need priority. And if we do that first, we'll be much more able to handle everything else. Sounds simple, sounds obvious, but it's true. I mean, it's also, for example, research has shown that things like keeping a gratitude journal makes people more happy. It's simple, it seems cheesy to some people. It means that at the end of the day, every day, write down 5 things for which you were grateful that day. 5 things that gave you a greater sense of emotional and physical well-being. People often kind of reduce this exercise to mechanical, what's obvious or what I ought to be grateful about. So identify 5 things that you're grateful for because they gave you a greater sense of emotional or physical well-being, not because you ought to be grateful for that and you ought to appreciate that. The ought would, of course, be the problem in that situation. So those things, whatever they are, they can make a profound difference to our lives. And in fact, research has shown, that's Emmons and McCullough, has shown that that makes a very big impact on people's lives, as does simply doing things you love. The famous psychologist Abraham Maslow said, the most beautiful fate, the most wonderful good fortune that could happen to any human being is to be paid for doing that which he passionately loves to do. And, I get a lot of people coming to me for career guidance. And while we have to take practical things into account, like how much are you going to earn and what are your actual skills, the first thing you have to consider is what makes me happy. Ideally, I will find ways to bring at least parts of that into what I do, but ultimately find what you love to do. It doesn't have to be meaningful. It doesn't have to have an impact on anything else. The impact it must have is on you. I love doing this. It's the kind of thing I would do whether or not they paid me for it, but I'm going to have them pay me for it. Maslow says that is the key to happiness, because wealth is not a predictor of happiness. What is a predictor of happiness? So in that example, it's like, as I say, even if you weren't being paid for it, it's kind of like when you're happy and things are working well, you do seem to become more passionate, attract more clients or whatever they may be, and you often can succeed better. It's not a magical solution, but the solution is it's more important to feel happy than to be wealthy, is it not? What is the wealth that we require? Psychologist Tim Kasser says that it's not material affluence that we should be looking for, it's time affluence. Time affluence is the feeling that you've got sufficient time to pursue activities that are meaningful to you, that you can pursue leisure activities, that you've got time just to reflect and be. Wealth affluence is you've got enough money to buy things you don't need. But time affluence, well, you do need those things that the time affluence is giving you. Time poverty, he says, is that feeling of constantly being stressed or rushed or behind or having a deadline or not able to. I'll get round to it eventually. I wish I'd had more time to read. How many people have said that to me? And when you hear yourself say something like that, you actually have to sit down and realize this pervasiveness of time poverty and try and restructure your life little by little to introduce the possibility of time affluence. Spend less time doing stuff you have to do, especially because of other people, and spend more time doing what you want to do for you. Because life is short, you can't put off being happy. And that is one of the most fundamental principles of Stoicism. It comes from the great Stoic Seneca, who said that we're forever putting off, on our for our bucket list, the things that we'd really like to do, the things that would make us happy. So it's fine. I have to work. I have to work now. I'm an adult and all of that. But when I retire, I'll be able to do the things that make me happy. Firstly, Seneca says, how do you know how long you're going to live? So you don't know that you're going to reach that point when you're able to do it. Plus, by then you'll be too old to do many of them or to get the pleasure that you require and the best results from many of those things as well. And you've spent an entire life being unhappy in order to buy a little bit of limited happiness when you can least use it. And he says, doesn't that sound wrong? So that alone tells us we need to reprioritize. We might not be able to change everything in our lives. That might be a little bit idealistic. But for the most part, if we try and turn it around so that we spend more time doing things which make us happy, we can let go of other things that we don't need to do right now, and we can stop doing everything continuously so that it feels like a pressure. Because the truth is that if you stop at 5 o'clock, the world isn't going to fall down. You can carry on tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with the stuff that you have to do. As Seneca put it, life is short. There is no time to do stuff that makes you unhappy, that is not for you, that is stuff that you don't really have to do in order to achieve happiness. In reality, it's a balance of life that we're looking for. The Stoics are very big on the idea of pursuing happiness. The well-known magician, Darren Brown, actually wrote a book called Happy about the Stoic philosophy of happiness. And, puts it obviously in modern terms. His book, I think, is called How to Be Happy. And it basically follows straightforward Stoic principles. According to Brown, one of the biggest problems with our modern culture and the way that people think that we're supposed to pursue happiness is positive thinking. So we get encouraged to think positively against all the odds. And perhaps that might occasionally be useful, but as he says, the magician says, positive thinking is not magic. So most of the time, positive thinking will not match the actual outcome of whatever it is that you were thinking about, because in reality, there's an endless number of possibilities. Positive thinking is a clinging to hope that often means denying the real situation, avoiding doing what you could do to actually create the results or create the positive outcome, rather than just thinking positively about it. Darren Brown defines positive thinking as extremely stressful and dangerous. He says, rather follow the Stoic approach of choosing the attitude you take to events with an understanding that you can't control the event, but you can control the response. Positive thinking is a thinking about something outside of you. Well, hopefully this will happen, or it'll end up like that. I'm sure it will be fine. And it's all about this effort to either control or admit our reliance on these things that are external to ourselves. The core of a Stoic philosophy is to be in control of what you are really in control of. Only that. And the only thing we really are in control of is how we respond and deal with whatever the events may be. He says you can't control the events. Being positive about it is pointless. Rather, do something that makes you positive. How you're dealing with it, taking a constructive approach by doing the things that you know make you happy and applying that as best as possible to the problem at hand. Negative thinking is also a problem. So he says you do have to conquer negative thinking. So the first step in that is acknowledging the negative thoughts, not pushing them away, saying I shouldn't, rather acknowledge them. And then literally ask for evidence of how do I know this is the outcome? And also ask yourself, if this was happening to someone else, what would I do? Because often we respond helpfully and practically to someone else in a crisis situation, but to ourselves we become helpless and nihilist, negative about it. So we need to be more kind to ourselves. Brown shows the research that shows the kinds of basic things that enhance our happiness, that the realistic thing about them are mostly that we don't have to change anything in order to achieve them. So I've been saying how, we need to concentrate on ourselves and make ourselves our own priority and be in control of what we actually are in control of, that's ourselves. But it's easier said than done, because you do have a job that you have to go to. So how do we actually achieve happiness within the difficult boundaries of this world that started off teaching us we need the rat race, go and get the goal? And it's by introducing, similarly to what I said earlier, introducing rituals that make us happy. So Brown says the things that make us happy, according to research, exercise. We might not like doing it, but we always feel better after we do it. Our body might feel sore, but even that often feels good. It's like a good sore. It's like that good tired you get from exercise. So exercise, movement, make a dance, that makes us happy. Time spent in nature makes us happy. So spending more time outdoors, we know 10 minutes a day in the sun makes an enormous difference to health, both physically and mentally. And then just time in nature, outdoors, time in spaces bigger than yourselves. If you live in a place where there's a lot of nature, or where there's somewhere you can just go for a walk in a big park with a lot of trees, spending time with nature that's bigger than ourselves often works best and relieves us of the feeling of stress of being this individual. Decluttering our environment is another way. It might not always be nature, but making more space and breathing room in the environment is a way to also just relieve some of the stress. And time spent with other beings that are happy. Spend time with happy people. Spend time with pets, because pets generally love us unconditionally, respond very positively, and have a very good effect on us. Most people know that without their pets, they might not make it through the day or the year, that the emotional reward, it's why we keep them half the time, is enormous. And it's a simple route to ensuring a greater happiness. And then he says, when you're spending your money, buy time with it. What does he mean by that? Well, we talked about time affluence a moment ago. He says, rather spend more to order in and have the food brought to you. You don't have to cook. You don't have to go to the restaurant. You're spending more because it's a delivery, but you've bought time. And that gives you a little bit of time affluence, which we know makes us happy. Generosity also makes us happy. Just giving freely of ourselves. And volunteer work has been shown to increase happiness and reduce depression, reduce mortality rates. People who engage in volunteer work tend to live healthier, longer, happier. It's not the purpose of life, as we've seen. We mustn't purpose around these goals that are end destinations. It's the process of giving freely that does that. But most importantly, says Brown, you need to take a break. Don't be so hard on yourself. And the easiest way to take a break is to remember you're not in control of other people. You're not in control of other situations. Only your thoughts and your actions are in your control. Nothing else is. And once you realize that, and once you let go of what's not in your control, you achieve a life without stress and worry. Because the things in your control, you don't have to worry about, you can do something about. Stress and worry is generally related to things that are not in your control, even when they affect you. So you can be worried about your health. There's something you can do about your health. You might not be able to cure the disease that's worrying you, but you can do what you need to do and know, I've done as much as I can. And that helps in that situation. In many ways, it relates to the final piece of advice that Brown gives, and that is redefine your story. Let go of painful thoughts and beliefs. He says, our unhappiness about our past and about our lives is based on the story we always telling ourselves and how we interpret it. So he says, don't let the world define your story, you define it. So if something bad happened to you, reinterpret that misfortune in a constructive way. Constructive, not just positive. Constructive, meaning it's useful, it was beneficial. So interpreting a broken leg as an opportunity to learn another skill, like drawing, because you had to sit there. So you see it as opportunity, turning your narrative into something more empowering, something that really enriches you. You can't shape the narrative, he says, but you can shape the meaning of the narrative. And if you're careful not to just use bland positivity and actually look for what constructive arose out of that, then you're on the road to happiness. Happiness is not dependent on circumstances, on fame, on fortune. Happiness depends on how we choose to see our life and see our world. By learning to control our thought, our action, our reaction, and our story, we can experience happiness as a way of life.